Most of the Chicago Bears 53-man roster is set after the first preseason game against the Miami Dolphins, with only one or two spots that really feel like they're still in question.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to update this Bears 53-man roster where the preseason playing time against the Dolphins showed us pretty clearly how things are stacked up. And then it really only becomes a question. It's not so much for me like who's going to make the 53-man roster over each other, like who's worth keeping. And it's more like how many players at a few positions will they ultimately decide to keep. But we'll kind of go through this roster and look at what's pretty set and the few things here and there that are a little bit left as question marks. And we'll wrap up taking a look at how that might then shape the playing time we should expect to see these players in the second preseason game against the Buffalo Bills. But really for me, while the Dolphins game is by no means setting in stone the order, I do think the fact that they start in this order for the first preseason game suggests that it's going to take a lot to unseat some of these different orders. And that not that it's 100% locked in, but like to me, it's pretty clear who's making the cut and who's not. Like maybe we don't know exactly who's going to start at cornerback or who's going to start at left tackle, but we know those guys are making the 53-man roster. And I think based on the rest of the playing time, we can kind of tell who's on the fringe and who's not. Like, for example, we look at the quarterback position with Tyson Bagent playing pretty much all the first half, and then Case Keenum doing part of the second half, and Austin Reed doing part of the second half. Like, it feels to me pretty clearly that Tyson Bagent is the number 2 quarterback on the depth chart, and Case Keenum is probably going to be the number 3. And it's to me, it's not a question of like, well, you know, could Keenum still become the number 2? I mean, never say never, but to me, the real question is, do they keep 3 quarterbacks or do they only choose to keep 2 on the 53? Like, that's kind of what I mean here. It's not, is Keenum good enough to make the team, but it's like, do they want to keep an extra body at that position, or say, for comparison, the running back spot? Do they keep 4 running backs? Someone like Travis Homer. When you've got Roschon Johnson injured, that makes it a real question mark there. They signed another running back on Monday officially. It was announced over the weekend, or it was reported over the weekend, officially announced on Monday. Britton Brown, a former undrafted free agent of the Raiders, brought in for more running back depth. So then if Roschon Johnson's injured, right, do you then keep Travis Homer as a 4th running back, or do you just stick with Swift, Roschon, and Kyle Monungai as your 3 running backs and then not keep that 4th, right? It's not so much Travis Homer fighting for his spot on the running back rotation. It's a matter of, does his special teams value usurp the special teams value of some other player somewhere else on the roster? And does Case Keenum's value as a veteran in the quarterback room, kind of a coach in the position group, does that put his value above a good special teams player like Travis Homer? I mean, all these guys across the roster, I think, are going to be kind of put head to head in that way. You know, I think at tight end, things are a little bit more set there. We know it's Kmet and Loveland are kind of the clear 1 and 2. I think all the other backup tight ends have been pretty bad, and were pretty bad in that Dolphins game. Durham Smythe, I thought, was pretty terrible. Not doing a lot for me there. But Steven Carlson didn't do much for me. Joel Wilson didn't do much for me. I'd like to see a better number 3 tight end, but that's a very low priority. But they'll certainly keep 3 at a bare minimum there, and it's a question of, I guess, if they'd want to keep a 4th, but that seems pretty unlikely to me. Then you look at like the offensive line, just to kind of bring us full circle around the offense here. I guess we'll get to wide receivers too. Like, I think we know the top 8 offensive linemen pretty clearly. You know, of course, our starting 5 is Darnell Wright, Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman, Joe Tooney, and then either Braxton Jones or Ozzie Trapilo. The other one will be a backup, so that's 6. And then Ryan Bates is for sure going to be one of your top backups as a guard center. That's 7. And then Karana Magaji, as long as he's healthy enough, is going to make this 53-man roster. There's 8 offensive linemen right there. They may only keep 8 offensive linemen. and say that's good enough because Trapillo can be your swing tackle, Amagaji can play guard or tackle potentially, and then Ryan Bates can play center or guard, and you could feel like 8 offensive linemen might be enough. Or they look at it, maybe they want to keep their 6th-round rookie Luke Newman as a 9th offensive lineman, or certainly the veteran Jordan McFadden I thought was particularly impressive against the Dolphins. Like he and Newman are kind of fighting for that 9th spot, but also we don't even know if a 9th spot is actually going to exist on this Bears 53-man roster. And as we get closer to actual cut down day, we'll look back at some Lions rosters and some Saints rosters to try and get a sense of how many players at each position Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen might want to keep on their respective sides of the ball. But like that's the bigger question right now, more so than the players themselves. And we can throw in wide receiver as a part of this conversation. The 6 that we thought would be at the top remain pretty firmly at the top based on playing time and allocation, right? We know that against the Dolphins, DJ Moore did not play, Rome Odunze did not play, Olamide Zaccheaus did not play. That is a very clear indication that those 3 players are the 1, 2, 3 on your wide receiver depth chart. Then they came out in that game, and their starting wide receivers were Tyler Scott and Devin Duvernay. And so that makes them your 4 and 5 in some order. And then Luther Burden was very clearly the 6th wide receiver to take the field. That feels pretty firmly your 6 receivers. I mean, could they want to keep a 7th? Someone like Maurice Alexander and Samori Toure were kind of the next guys up in this game. Alexander had that nice touchdown. The undrafted free agent Ja'Day Walker is in that conversation, but they're probably not going to want to keep a 7th wide receiver. I mean, we don't know, but it seems a little bit unlikely to me. And so we kind of know who the 6 are there. Like there's not a big mystery of how they're going to cut down the wide receiver position in particular. So on offense, it really comes down to 3 quarterbacks or 2, 4 running backs or 3, and 9 offensive linemen or 8. And the biggest wild card in all of those conversations is just going to be the injuries. It is, if Roschon Johnson just needs another week and then he's good to go, then maybe they only keep 3 running backs. But if Roschon Johnson misses the entirety of the preseason with this, I think it's a foot injury he's dealing with, well, maybe they do want to keep Travis Homer around as a 4th running back there. And then on the offensive line, right now, Doug Kramer is injured as a backup center, not playing right now. Karan Amagaji also injured and didn't play against the Dolphins. If Karan is going to miss a little bit more time, then do you need to keep that 9th interior offensive lineman in there to give you some more depth there? Or if Karan's good to go, then do you just stick with the 8 because you like the 8 and you feel like they can cover multiple positions, and then you can keep more depth at another spot where they might actually play a little bit more option instead of just being sort of an emergency injury replacement type of situation? And you also have to sort of equate or add into the equation who might you be able to get on the practice squad more easily, right? Someone like Travis Homer probably isn't going to go on the practice squad, but you could put 6th-round pick Luke Newman on the practice squad a bit easier. You can get Maurice Alexander or Samori Toure back on the practice squad maybe easier than you could get Tyler Scott on the practice squad, or you're not going to get Case Keenum on the practice squad, so maybe you want to keep him on your 53-man roster. Like those are the different kind of discussions that are going to go into the final decision here, more so than like how well does Case Keenum play in the next 2 preseason games, or how well does Travis Homer play in the next 2 preseason games. Like I don't think that's really, I don't think that's where the evaluation is for a lot of these spots. And that's kind of the point across the roster here, right? Like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of guys that are truly battling for a roster spot. It's purely like a numbers and math and business equation of like, who does it make the most sense to keep? Where do we want the more of the depth, as opposed to one player being better than another player? And I think there's a similar theme on defense, although there's one spot in particular on the defense that I'm really stuck on. Of like, I don't know how it sorts out today. There's one particular position that is just totally up in the air for me in a way that I can't give you a good answer, and another one where injuries are going to make a really big factor that could go a long way towards shaping what this 53-man roster looks like. So we'll take a closer look at Dennis Allen's side of the ball next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I play fantasy football on Yahoo, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Fantasy Guillotine Leagues with Yahoo, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team each week gets eliminated from the league until there's only one team left standing. So with the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new game mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can always still play in the head-to-head private leagues or join in one of Yahoo's public leagues. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. This defense has a similar theme as the offense, although I'm really torn at the defensive tackle position that I think right now is impossible to predict with any sort of real accuracy. And then health of cornerbacks, namely Jalen Johnson and Terrell Smith, will have a drastic impact on how many they decide to keep at that position. And I wonder if a potential short-term injured reserve stand might not come into factor there at that spot in particular. But I think the rest of the defense feels pretty well set to me without many question marks still to answer. Like, for example, at the edge rusher position, we know it's Montez Sweat and Dio Odengbo are the two starters for sure. We know Tano Passanio is kind of the number 3 there. He started against the Dolphins and then came out early and then they left Austin Booker and Dominic Robinson in for a while. And then eventually, the other defensive ends got in there. But like your 1, 2, 3 is set. And then it's Booker and Dom Robinson 4, 5. Obviously, Booker had a huge performance with 3 sacks and was dominant out there. But he was also clearly behind Passanio and Dom Robinson because he didn't start the game. He came off the bench later in that game. And so I guess the question is, do you keep 4 defensive ends or do you keep 5 defensive ends? And if you're only keeping 4, then presumably Dominic Robinson is probably the odd man out there. They're not going to cut Austin Booker in year 2, especially after the preseason he's having. And so it's a question of, does Robinson make the cut or not? But it's less about like how good Dominic Robinson is and more about, well, do you want to keep 5 defensive ends or not? It's not so much like, is he better than the other guy next to him? It's well, do you keep a 5th defensive end or a 5th defensive tackle or a 6th linebacker? It's like, where do you keep your extra players? Because defensive tackle to me is the spot on this defense that I really can't get a good predictive grip on, because I think they've kind of, I don't know if it's quietly or not, but like they've slowly amassed pretty solid depth there where they've got 7 defensive tackles that all have a pretty good case for making the 53-man roster. 6 for sure that have a really good case. The 7th one is maybe borderline, but like, I don't think you're going to keep 6 defensive tackles. I mean, typically you think of them keeping 4, but if there's 7 guys on the roster right now, it's really hard to find 3 to cut to get you down to 4 defensive tackles. But then, if you want to keep 5 defensive ends, are you keeping 5 defensive tackles and going with a 10-man defensive line? We'll have to look at the Saints defensive lines to see if they'll go that deep. But off the top of my head, I don't think Dennis Allen has typically kept that many defensive linemen. But the challenge is Shamar Turner's dealing with an injury. So if he's on, if he could do an injured reserve, even a short-term thing, that could free up 1 roster spot there. But he might, I think he's expected to be back in time for week 1, but he's going to be way behind and having a lot of catching up to do. So would you be better off putting him on an injured reserve for the first 4 weeks of the season or whatever before you can activate him off? But like we know, guaranteed roster spots at defensive tackle, Grady Jarrett, Andrew Billings, Gervon Dexter, for sure. Those 3 are locked in. And then, Shamar Turner, if not on an injured reserve, he also is guaranteed a roster spot. And I think if everyone were healthy, those would be your 4, and we'd just be questioning, does Zach Pickens make the team or not? But we've seen a lot of great flashes from Chris Williams, the defensive tackle they traded for at the end of last preseason, who played on this roster all throughout last year and was in there as a starter in this preseason game. It was him and Zach Pickens were like the top 2 defensive tackles off the bench. So like if you had to rank your top 5, right, it's Grady Jarrett, Gervon Dexter, Billings, and then Williams and Pickens. Like if you're going to keep 5 defensive tackles, it might be them. But then Shamar Turner, like if he's not going to be on injured reserve, then that would leave you 6 defensive tackles. And are you going to hold on to all 6? Or do you cut Zach Pickens as a third-round pick who they don't want to give up on at this point? But at some point, you got to produce, and he hasn't been able to do that yet. Or Chris Williams, they just traded a 6th-round pick for last year, and he's flashed some in the preseason and been impressive at practice, and he's gotten first-team reps. So like that to me, I don't have a sense of, and I'm not even sure that 2 more preseason games will answer that for me, right? Because I don't know that Pickens is going to be like so good or so bad that it becomes so obvious what you got to do with him. And maybe same thing for Chris Williams. Like, can those guys have a performance that just says that's going to change your evaluation of the player more broadly? Like, these are not rookies, right? These are players who you can go back and watch years of tape on them and see how they do it at weeks of practice. And boy, I just don't know. You're going to have to make a tough cut there. And that's a spot that I'm not confident in trying to predict for this Bears defense. The rest of it, a little bit easier, right? Linebacker, we know Edmonds, Edwards are your top 2. Then Sewell and Anbagbamiga are your next 2. Sewell and Ruben Hippolyte are your next 2. And then Eamon Anbagbamiga is your special teams ace, your 5th linebacker, and you're probably only going to keep those 5. I don't think they need a 6th. I don't think they have a guy who commands that you keep a 6th linebacker in there. So I think you could pretty much in pen put down your Bears linebackers on the 53-man roster. And same thing at safety, right? We know Byard and Brisker are your starters. Hicks and Owens are your backups. And I mean, unless they want to keep a 5th one for special teams, but probably just going to be those 4 at safety at this point, which then leaves the big question mark at cornerback, because we know Jalen Johnson is injured and might not be ready for week 1. We talked about that prognosis a little bit on yesterday's podcast and why we're concerned that, week 1 seems like more in doubt than the Bears are letting on. So you can go back and take a listen to that if you want more details there. But then Terrell Smith leaves the preseason game against the Dolphins with a groin injury and was doubtful to return. And so you wonder, is that going to be an extended injury there? Not necessarily, season ending or anything, but just something that's going to affect your 53-man roster decisions, because the order is not super questionable here. We know Jalen Johnson's number 1. We know Stevenson and Nashawn Wright are competing for number 2 and 3 in there. Kyler Gordon's your slot player, so there's 4 cornerbacks. And then Zay Frazier is a rookie who hasn't played at all. He's been out with a personal issue, so maybe does he end up on, I don't know if you can put him on injured reserve if it's not actually an injury, but he's away from the team. So, but otherwise he would be a 5th one in there. Terrell Smith would be like a 6th one in there, and Josh Blackwell would be a 7th one in there. And I don't think, Nick McLeod or Trey Flowers or any other guys they brought in this offseason, I don't think any of them are really cracking that top 7. But you could have as many as 3 of those 7 not ready to go week 1. If Jalen Johnson's not ready to go, if Terrell Smith's not ready to go, and certainly Zay Flowers or Zay Frazier's been away so long that I don't think he's going to be ready to go. And so then how many cornerbacks do you keep? If you got Stevenson, Wright, and Gordon are your 1, 2, 3 if Jalen Johnson's out, and then Josh Blackwell is kind of a backup slot, sort of, but then you need another guy on the outside. And so if Terrell Smith is healthy, then that's easy and you're good to go. Or if Zay Frazier comes back soon and he can be ready to go, then it starts to solve itself. But cornerback to me is similarly unpredictable just because we don't know the extent of the injuries there. But they're going to need some bodies, and it's a matter of how many guys are healthy and good to go versus not going to be ready to be relied on in week 1. Not so much a starting lineup question because, you got Stevenson and Wright and Gordon, in your slot there, but some unanswered questions there. Also not contingent on how well they play in the last 2 preseason games, just more like how other external factors affect what the 53-man roster looks like. So again, to sort of summarize here, right? The spots that are a little bit unclear: QB, running back, O-line, D-tackle, corner. There's maybe 5-ish. And O-line might not even be that much of a question if Karan is healthy and good to go. There's 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 spots on the 53-man roster that today you can't sit here with much confidence and say 100% certainty. But everybody else seems more or less locked in. And so that, to me, I think is going to shape how we see these players used against the Bills in the second preseason game. So I want to kind of preview a little bit, not so much the game, right, but what we can expect for playing time based on what the Dolphins game showed us next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Coming up August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day. It's a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. On August 26th, for 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP or eyeing a long shot division winner, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this will be your moment. You can bet on, say, Ben Johnson to be coach of the year odds there. You can go Caleb Williams as a long shot MVP, or you can even parlay your division winner dark horses. However you want to do it, it's all there for the new holiday of FanDuel Futures Days on August 26th. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only with FanDuel. Play your game. So if the vast majority of this 53-man roster is mostly set, then that leaves a lot of your primary preseason players as mostly guys playing for their potential practice squad spots, if not a lot of 53 is available. And so I want to use this to sort of shape what we should expect to see in terms of playing time in the next preseason game. Later on this week, as we get closer to the Bills game, we'll take a look at specific players to watch and things to watch for from those players, especially some of these guys that are kind of on that fringe, those handful of 5 or 6 guys that are borderline, or just some other guys that are going to make the team, but we just need to see more improvement from. But I do think we've heard Ben Johnson hint around the idea of maybe still playing the starters a little bit this preseason. And so I would expect, I don't even know if expect's the right word, but if he's going to play the starters, it would be this week against the Bills. I don't think they're going to do it in the third preseason game. I think it's going to be this one. And if they do, it's got to be one drive. I mean, maybe if it's a 3 and out, then it's 2 drives. But I'm thinking 5 to 10 plays, and then they pull them, right? So if you get a couple of first downs on that opening drive, that's all we're going to see from Caleb Williams. And we might not even see all of the starters. Well, first of all, there's a couple starters with some injury question marks. Jonah Jackson has missed a little bit of practice, so maybe he doesn't play. Joe Tooney's in his 30s. Maybe he doesn't play. Grady Jarrett's in his 30s. Maybe he doesn't play. Montez Sweat, maybe he doesn't play, although we might see Sweat out there, right? So it might not be a complete starting 22, but most of the starters, I think, will probably get one extended drive worth of action. Then they come out. But I think on offense, you see, I would predict we'll still see Braxton Jones stay in, much like he did against the Dolphins this past week, where the rest of the starters will come out, but Braxton Jones will work with the second-team offensive line. And I would expect a fairly similar structure to what we saw this past game, because we talked about this on yesterday's podcast as well. Braxton Jones is still not quite perfectly 100% physically, but he's getting closer and closer to it. And I think the Bears want him to get some of this playing time to continue to work through that and knock off some of the rust and get more and more physically comfortable on the field, so that even if by the next preseason game the left tackle battle might be over by then, I still think they're going to have him play kind of as though the left tackle battle is not over, just so he can kind of keep literally getting his feet back under him on the football field. But then he might play a quarter and a half, maybe almost the whole first half, like against the Dolphins. Then I think we'll see Ozzie Trapillo play almost a whole half, and then like against the Dolphins, Theo Benedict got some left tackle reps at the end. I mean, maybe they'll do that and take Trapillo out, but I would expect that when the starters are done, Jones stays, and then they kind of keep that going on. And similar thing on defense, I would think that starters minus Grady Jarrett probably will be out there, and of course, Jalen Johnson's hurt, but minus those guys. But then when the rest of the starters come off of the field, that maybe they leave Stevenson and Nahshon Wright out there a couple of drives. We saw them play a little bit longer against the Dolphins than some of the other, offensive starters. Like Colson Loveland only played 6 snaps and he was done. But Stevenson and Wright played 16. Tano Passanio played 16. Those were guys that were kind of treated like starters and then taken out pretty early in that game. So I wonder if maybe Stevenson and Wright do the whole first quarter, right? Or a couple of drives, even as backups come in the front seven and then maybe even the rest of the secondary around them, just as that battle kind of remains an open competition for that number 2 cornerback spot. But then once all the main starters are out and the main backups are in, I think we're going to see a lot more of Zach Pickens, as many reps as they can to kind of see his growth and development and progress and see whether or not he's worth keeping on the 53-man roster. I think we'll see a lot of Austin Booker to see if he can continue a big, follow up his big 3-sack performance and show them that he belongs higher up in the edge rusher rotation and can be a difference maker on the defensive end position this season. And as a result, I wonder if we'll see more Dominique Robinson in the next game than we did this one. Like, he didn't play a small amount, but he didn't play nearly as much as, some of the guys ahead of him or not ahead of him, but around him on the depth chart. So I wonder if as Booker keeps playing better, if that leaves more question about Robinson's spot, and maybe that means a little bit more playing time for him. We'll see exactly how it plays out. But then I think we'll see a lot of Ruben Hippolyte. I think we'll continue to see a lot of Noah Sewell. Like, I think those guys that are like not necessarily fighting for their jobs, but you just want to continue to see more progress and growth and development from them on defense. I think those guys will play a lot. And then you get back to the guys fighting for practice squad spots, like the undrafted linebackers and some of the other pass rushers and stuff, the DBs that don't really have a shot at making the 53, but are still trying to extend their careers somewhere. And then on the offensive side of that same equation, right, I think, once the starters go out, I think we'll see a lot of Luther Burden again. I think we'll see a lot of Kyle Monungai again. Really, the rookies are who we'll see, even if they're borderline starters or contributors, those are the ones that are going to play quite a bit more. We've seen Ben Johnson do that in Detroit in the past. We talked about that a little bit in the lead up to the Dolphins game here on the podcast of the rookies, even if they're starting caliber players, they'll play a little bit more than some of the other quote unquote starters on your roster. Throw Luke Newman in there, the 6th-round guard that we talked about a little bit earlier. I think he's going to play a ton in that game. And hopefully we see more Jordan McFadden too. Against the Dolphins, we saw Chris Glazer start at right guard and was pretty terrible. So I'd rather see Newman and McFadden be the top 2 backup guards in a game like this. Hopefully Doug Kramer can be back and healthy and get to see more of him and see if he can play a little bit more. But other than that, those are the guys that I think are more critical, need to see more of them because they're fighting for more than just their spot on the practice squad. And then everybody else, it's the Ja'Day Walkers of the world, the J.P. Richardsons at receiver trying to fight it out for a practice squad spot. It's the running backs, Ian Wheeler and Deion Hankins, or the new one they just signed, Britton Brown, trying to fight for practice squad spots. The bottom of the depth chart tight ends, Joel Wilson and Steven Carlson. Some of these guys that are far from household names, but you kind of hope that you keep them around in the practice squad and they can develop and maybe become something not so much this year, but a little bit down the line. And I'll continue to keep a close eye on Tysheem Johnson, the DB who is small, undersized Oregon, kind of lines up all over the place. They used him mostly at free safety. They didn't use him in the slot much, but in the box a little bit. I was surprised they didn't try more things with him, but maybe Dennis Allen doesn't want to give away some similar things he might try and do with Kyler Gordon. Want to keep it a little bit more vanilla. Maybe ask an undrafted rookie to just kind of stick at one thing before you put everything all on his plate. But he's somebody who I think they're going to stash on the practice squad and see what they might do. But they do keep swapping out some of the DBs at the bottom of the depth chart with a couple of transactions on Monday as well. Got some new and old former undrafted free agent guys swapped in and out, so they might get some extended looks in these final 2 preseason games as well. But we'll have plenty of time to preview this Bears-Bills preseason matchup more closely as the week goes on right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. And if you're looking for a second listen today, now that we're wrapping up Locked On Bears, be sure to go check out the Locked On NFL podcast for even more football talk. I co-hosted on Tuesday mornings with Tyler Rowland. The podcast comes out twice a day with Tony in the afternoon, Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jags in the afternoon. In the morning, it's Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans with me on Tuesdays. And we talked about all sorts of stuff today. Quarterbacks, some of the rookie quarterbacks being around the NFL. We talked about Micah Parsons. We talked about James Cook sitting out the Bills preseason game. And there was one more other thing we talked about, and I can't remember for the life of me. It was the first segment we did, too. It was whatever the biggest story of the day was in football. And I'm already struggling to find what it was. But yeah, that's why you got to go listen to Locked On NFL to hear all about the biggest and latest happenings in the NFL. And I swear, as soon as I finish recording this podcast, it's going to click and hit me. And I'm going to duh, of course. We spent 8-10 minutes talking about that. And I'm just totally out of it. I'm all focused on Bears, and I can't think about other football teams, after I'm wrapping up a Locked On Bears podcast. So go check out Locked On NFL. Come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.